In recognition of Eric Horvitz's leadership as founding board chair at PAI, I'm delighted to announce that Microsoft has given a gift of $200,000 to stand up a new interdisciplinary advisory body. We have been calling it our SAGE group because they will have deep wisdom. They will be socio-technical, interdisciplinary, and international in nature, and really help us at PAI and the broader community to better understand where we need to be going in this moment. And that's a little bit about what we're going to be talking about this morning. So let's start there. I mean, one of what you brought to PAI back in 2016 was this deep understanding of the science of AI, of machine learning and deep learning, and many other areas of science that had formed the development of artificial intelligence as we then knew it. You also brought this deep understanding that this was going to need to be interdisciplinary, that there had to be a diversity of perspectives around the table. Can you talk a little bit, what was it that gave you that insight and that inspiration coming to PAI when you did? And why do you think that is so fundamental as we look around this room today to thinking about really solving the challenges ahead of us and solving for beneficial AI for all?
Yeah, my sense has been for a number of years now that we are entering a very transformational period for humanity around these technologies that are the first technologies to really read on capabilities that in the past have been wholly ascribed to human intellect, with many multiple myriad connections to people in society, and nobody has the answers. You know, we have great technical people and great policy people in industry as well as in civil society and in academia, but we also need to involve the public with education and both providing ideas and background about where we are, but also listening. So we have a lot to learn, and I have a deep sense that and trust in collaborative processes, in particular democracy. So for me, it gets back to this long-term notion that we're better together. We need lots of opinions. We need to hear. We need to share. We need to understand anxieties and their foundations and their basis. We need to share the excitement about what's possible. But it's still the early days, and it didn't seem that there would be any single set of voices that would be more helpful than bringing together passionate expertise as well as non-expertise to start thinking about how to shape this technology. You know, there's a lot of sense for AI because it reads on intellect and suggests notions of autonomy, that it's going to do its own thing, and everything's going to be laissez-faire with maybe AI leading itself into the future. But the reality is that this is a human technology. We've created it, and we will continue to be deeply and completely in charge of shaping it as people. And that notion that, you know, if you take that seriously, it requires lots of hands. You know, sitting here just now, I was thinking to myself, as as Jeremy and you were talking this morning, it's in so many ways we're ahead of how technologies were fielded in the past. Was there a partnership on electricity, on steam power, on social media, as these things were taking off and becoming part of people in society and intrinsic to our civilization in many ways? Flight. You know, there's a really small section in the book by David McCullough on the Wright brothers. It's a very small set of pages, like in this gigantic, otherwise exciting book about the technical developments and all their engagements with governments and what they were doing to make flight a real thing in the early days of air transport. And at some point, there was a comment that somebody asked, I think Wilbur Wright, what about using these things in warfare? Has anybody thought about that? And the comment was along the lines of, Wilbur, I mean, it could have been Orville. I don't want to get the wrong one here. One of the two brothers who was on this panel looked kind of confused and quizzical and thought, interesting question. What if there were principles about you don't drop things on cities from these things up in the air early on? Would have been game changing. Anyway, so I think to see where we are now in the interest, not just in PAI, but of course, we've seen flowers blooming all over the place over the last 7 years of our existence. It's great to see.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's such a good point. I was reading Daron Acemoglu's Power and Progress this year, and he makes the same point together with Simon Johnson around this need for there being these countervailing influences to innovation that are driving and thinking about what does it mean to do this responsibly and inclusively as well. And how it's not that innovation is going to necessarily drive those things automatically. So you've been involved in many projects at PAI. You've catalyzed many projects at PAI. When you think about, what does it mean to do that well, to have those and set the table for those conversations that can advance impact? Is there one that resonates with you in particular? Is there one that you think is driving towards that trajectory that you'd like to see amplified or advanced or accelerated? Is there, are there any of the projects that you've been a part of that really sort of speak to you about the unique impact and opportunity?
So it's only been 7 years, 7 times 12 months, and part of what we've been doing at PAI, from my perspective, has been exploration of even mechanisms, project types, even beyond the topics, right? And what we focused on, that how do we do a good job at X, being impactful, being educational, being good listeners, being a great venue for bringing together multi-party stakeholder points of view, and then processing that in a very fair way and learning from that. But on the topical front, and crossing it with things we've done, a number of things that's to come to the forefront of my mind. Some of the early output of PAI convenings was so powerful and useful to many sectors. I remember being at a meeting with senior legal folks from Yale who were getting interested in facial recognition. And at the meeting, I noticed, on my phone that we had just published our facial recognition tutorial and guide, and I distributed it. And the incredible feedback, they had never read such a balanced, clear view coming in from law, looking at the technology and the implications for policy and regulations. They never seen something so clear. I was so proud to share this document, which just hit the right level. I'll use an engineering term, was well impedance matched with society to make a big impact, to explain things clearly, so people can take it to the next level, because folks were all over the place and even understanding what it was exactly. So some of the output was interesting. I think going back also thinking about structure and what we were doing, thinking of who we brought on and what people did. So we had this FTA working group, Fairness, Transparency, and Accountability Working Group early on, co-chaired by Ed Felton, who had just come out of the Obama administration, playing a senior role on AI policy work, really strong work there, working with Tara Lyons actually back then, and Verity Harding. And just the two of them, Ed coming from government he was also, I think, at one time very senior at the Federal Trade Commission, then at Princeton, running a very big program on computation and society, meeting up with Verity Harding, working in policy at DeepMind at the time. And then you look at what they assembled. There was like about 70 people, and you look at who they are and what sectors they heralded from. The impressive convening and the output of that group and the documents they did, for example, leading to work like the algorithmic implications for criminal justice. What a great document. and how important it was coming at that moment in time, and still remains important as a reference guide. Um, Another really interesting thing we did, which probably people don't remember if you weren't around during the time, was Tara and I conspired a bit, of course, with the board um, and with the Natural Science Foundation. The NSF was very intrigued by this multi-party stakeholder organization rising into prominence, um, and we started discussing about what we might do to partner on core research, and we called this, this is like NSF getting into socio-technical research about AI and its implications for society and for individuals, and we came up with this idea that we would put about, I think I have to get the numbers straight here, about $1.5 million to $2 million in from our coffers. And NSF matched it with, I think it was $9 million. So it was an $11 million eager grant program. Early in, I don't know what eager stand for, but these are grants that go to early research in a new area. And here's the cool part about all this. So this is going to be a grant program that's peer-reviewed at NSF to academic researchers across the United States and other countries as well. And we were asked, can you please write the call? What did we do? At PAI, we wrote an NSF call that was essentially our themes and said, here's what we're interested in. The NSF program managers, including the director of the Intelligent Information Systems at the time, said this was the most, and the assistant director as well, there was the most enthusiasm they had ever seen on an eager grant program. There've been several of them, and the output was tremendously important and interesting for guiding the NSF in where they'd put future larger grant programs. And it was billed as NSF and Partnership on AI team on this grant program. So that, in some ways, raised us into prominence in government circles, among the universities, but more importantly, catalyzed incredible research projects across the nation that were along the themes we called out as being important to this organization.
Yeah, that's phenomenal work. And if you go back and look at those grants now and the reports that have come out of those grants and some of the work we've done, I mean, it really did do that important piece of catalyzing a whole community of researchers who were not able to get funding for a lot of those important questions, which we all sort of now think of as just sort of standard understanding of the field, and where the important questions and ideas are coming from. And so creating that foundation has just been crucial.
Before you move on, I just happened to see Sam sitting here, and I have to say that my current, the current project that gets me all electrified is the work that Claire Leibowitz has been leading. I have to say, where's Claire in the audience here? Working with Jessica on my team and others, Sam and others, on the whole synthetic, we'll call it the media integrity program, but with those 4 work streams and the synthetic media framework, which just is an incredible model for one approach. Again, we're exploring, right? One approach for how we engage with industry and society all up, where it's like, Jessica, where are you? Wait, okay. Jessica and I we had, with our Microsoft hats on, we're kind of had our eyebrows knitted, and we said, we need to respond to the call. We're up now. We have to give our annual analysis of what we're doing at Microsoft to, for our commitment to the synthetic media framework, and we focus on a LinkedIn case study. But the idea that going back to what this all means, the synthetic media framework asks for commitment of people who sign on to it for recurrent case studies of how they're actually grappling with media integrity and what they're doing, for example, with media provenance. What a great model to keep companies who want to be featured as being supportive of this really incredibly important framework. And by the way, it was created through in a very nice process as well, with lots of involvement on all sides. But to also give them something to worry about and to focus on and to be anxious about and to make sure they're on their toes and report out to society all up through PAI.
And we found, the huge interest in those use cases because, as we know, so much of the time we speak at a frameworks level, at a principles level, and we don't speak about what does it actually mean in practice and how can others learn from those use cases and the development. Okay, I would love to hear if there are any questions from the audience as we start to wind up, and as you think about whether there are some questions about what do we need when we think about the importance of working in partnership, interdisciplinarity, and multi-stakeholder ways in this moment. I'm sure there are lots of questions, but as you're thinking about that, let me ask you. You just recently published a paper where you sort of looked at the state of science of AI. You looked back at where we've come from, and also did some thinking about where you think the field might be going as well. When you think about that, taking sort of that grand view of the past and into the future, what do you think is most important for us in this room to know as we think about prioritizing our work into 2025 and beyond?
Well, let me say that I don't think any other technology will be more dominant in influences and changes in the way we live life than AI for our grandchildren. And we have to be thinking for that time scale. I think we can expect over the next 2 to 3 years just an increasingly impressive array of advances. It's going pretty fast now. I just gave a talk at Microsoft yesterday to our technical leadership where I think I knocked the socks off some very bright people who are following things pretty closely by showing them things you could do with some of the latest technology coming out that they hadn't tried yet. I'm happy to talk at coffee break about what I'm talking about to not keep any big secrets. But I do think that we can expect the capabilities to increase with these systems and questions to be arising about people, jobs, economy, and I think we'll also be seeing important questions that I think have been, in many ways, part of the dark matter of what we think about when we think about the duel of the power of the positive and concerns about influences and rough edges of AI advances, these topics include the nature of human agency, self-image in a world where these rising systems have rising competencies, notions of the role of the human when it comes to decision-making and various processes that might become more and more automated over time, self-conception when it comes to the arts, literature, and creativity. It's already having impact. These topics are rising in importance, yet it's still even the ontology of how we divide them up into pieces for like a report from PAI are challenging right now. So I think notions of psychology, companion systems, and what that means in people's lives, for example. So I think I would say right now they're softer areas, but they're more complex and in some ways nuanced but powerful and potentially extremely important to look at. And we need to sort of start grappling with even what the labels we use in our minds and in our studies to help with that work. I mean, we already have jobs, economy. We just published a paper, for example, from the National Academies of Science on the future of AI and the future of work in the United States. Just came out last week. The report I highly recommend you looking at that report. But we have these currently prioritized topics. And the question I ask everybody in this audience is, what topics are not on our list now that will be 3 years from now critically important and critically obvious as topics of study, which I think is interesting to ask about. And then there's I'll just mention the comment on one of those topics I'll just mention, so I think I should get this out. And please queue up your questions, because I think it's been a quiet audience, so I want to hear your questions. But when it comes to human role and human in larger systems where AI is playing a more dominant role, this idea of human-AI relationship and collaboration comes to the fore. Now, we called out human AI interaction and collaboration as one of the 6 themes when we kicked things off at PAI. And it's one that we haven't really at PAI focused on as much as some of the other topics like fairness, transparency, and accountability, media integrity, safety. But there's so much going on in this space, and just as one example, and we were talking over coffee about this morning, our larger team at Microsoft working in the area of agents or agentic systems, that systems of semi-autonomous pieces of code that will solve problems in collaboration. We recently published a paper I think we just launched it on Monday after several months of work on thinking about this human agent collaboration framework, calling out key challenges with communication and understanding between humans and these complex agentic systems. It's a critically important area because they're complicated, hard to understand, and the stakes are growing because with uses of tools and actions in the world, things can go wrong very easily given privileges granted to these systems. So I hope we do more work in that space.
And we will be having a panel led by Lama later today to talk specifically about that particular question. And I love that you went there at the end, because that is always what I have found about the work that we've done together, is that you've tried so much to shift the focus from the technology to the people and to the social setting and context and the humans. And what do we need to better understand about what they need, be it workers, be it scientists, be it community members and citizens. What do they need in order to ensure that the technology works for them? Okay, any questions, comments? And yes, and we have a microphone coming to you from Albert. Thank you, Albert.
Thank you. Hi, Albert Skirbo, MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy. Multi-sector arrangements are really hard. This is really cool to be here. I'm curious if there's any industries or sectors that haven't been as engaged as you'd love to see them. What sort of ask you'd have for this group to help get those folks engaged? And then if I can be greedy and ask one more question. We're all sort of representing various different groups across the world. I'm curious as to how you bring in the voice of individuals who are likely to be affected by any particular topic, above and beyond surveys. What does including those people in part of the process as we have these conversations look like?
Great questions.
Yeah, no, sure. I remember at Microsoft during the time we were very focused on facial recognition, Brad Smith, Natasha, and I organized a meeting over in the research building where we just invited, I think it was like 12 civil society groups in to hear from them about how they all felt and what their conception was for how these systems might be deployed, as well as to hear from us in terms of our reaction to their comments and so on. And the idea of having a town hall-like experience was just really incredible. It's to hear back and forth, even the constraints and what the company was what the company was thinking about when it came to trying to do our best job that we could. And the constraints we were under was informative to this group and so on. So thinking about who's not part of the conversation is really going to be an interesting question. So thanks for asking that. I think thinking about public engagement is another interesting area. By the way, here's another sector. My son is a PhD student at Columbia in AI. And I always thought, like, we think alike. We hang out, we do things together. And then one day we were talking about some of these issues, and it's like all of a sudden it got very serious between us. And I realized that he and his friends had a very different conception about where AI was going. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have young people, even young AI scientists, come into the conversation and make sure that we have the multiple generations involved, especially up-and-coming talent in this space across technology, policy, and so on. So thinking about that is another interesting set of sectors with a different kind of set of cuts. But it's a great question in general. One thing I'll just mention briefly is that from the very early days, I think it's very important for this organization of trying to build this multi-party stakeholder group. is thinking about how to establish trust among folks. You can, I still remember, I'll just have to say that in Berlin at our first partners meeting that we had, right at the beginning of the organization, we had a great group of people, and I was talking with somebody, I won't mention names right now, from a civil society organization at the coffee break, and I looked at her looking over my shoulder at the group, and then telling me, we're still trying to get a sense for, like, who this group is, and are they cool? Are we being manipulated? What's going on here exactly? And so the idea of even thinking about being authentic, communicating about our values and why we're doing this, is an ongoing dialogue which requires empathy and trust and authenticity, and continuing to do that, whether it be the kids groups or the talking with the Chinese AI companies. I mean, we had lots of interesting experiences over the years. Yeah. And this trust border is really something so important, I think, to think about.
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it's something, I mean, I know I'm looking at my team, it's something that is central to all of the work we do. And it's interesting because we think of ourselves as a multi-stakeholder group of organizations, but it is truly about the people who come and be part of the work we're doing. And one organization has all sorts of different perspectives within it. So there's a lot of work done just to try to set the table, right? To make sure that we have that diversity of perspectives and that willingness to be open to thinking about how we can work together as well. And we haven't been focusing so much on sectors as we have on thinking about new models. So one of the panels today will be on enterprise. And we've been really thinking about, our origins come very much out of the research arms of technology. So how can we think about what are the questions that are really important when we're seeing these systems being deployed, often in very highly interactive ways with individuals and consumers, and what is the trust that needs to be established there, and thinking about those solutions. But yeah, would love to talk to you more about that question. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Any other? Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tanya. It's great to hear the keynote conversation. I work for IKEA. I'm responsible AI. My question is actually a question about the past, but really thinking about the future. You've spoken a bit about the initial early moments of PAI and setting it up and just working with NSF to identify what are the areas. Like, how did you all, knowing that this is a multi-stakeholder conversation, how did you all pick the key areas and topics to work on? And I'm asking this from the point of, okay, how do we pick the future ones, over the next years and decades?
Well, it's interesting. We were lucky to have early on, before we even formed our board, folks like we had the scientific leads from most of the big companies. For example, like recent Nobel Prize winner Demis Haspis was very active, involved, and he still is. Cares a lot about the organization. In fact, I often view making this real was a Demis Eric thing, talking about, okay, we can both get the funds to kick off, and we'll start the funding from our organizations. But we also had Carol Rose from ACLU. We had Eric Sears, who was incredible. So we had a small group of we had a little mini multi-party stakeholder group, and then we had 3 rings of folks helping us. We had all the legal folks from different organizations in a ring. We had the communications folks in a ring. And so we were vetting things in different ways with different people and different kind of mini sector representations. So, and then some of them just made a lot of sense for kicking things off. Some were a little less obvious, like media integrity back in 2016. But it seemed in those days it was less about synthetic generation and more about, which I think we have to get more into, AI systems being actively used to persuade people by having psychological models and optimizing how they persuade and impersonate. But I guess it came down to being having some artistry, I guess, and we had to pick some things, and different people had different pet concerns and so on. You know, one area we haven't really talked a lot about, which I think is something we should bring up, is the last item. I think it was like number 7, because we always think about 6. I think 7 was opportunities to harness AI for the good. What can we do to help hasten launching incredibly valuable applications? And it's really important, I think, for this group to think we're not just here to regulate and to damp down and control and have knitted eyebrows and be concerned all the time, because there's this idea of, and this gets back to a paper coming out right now in medicine that I'm working on, where my co-author from Harvard Medical School said, he wrote this sentence: the biggest risk we face is not fielding this fast enough right now and relying on current healthcare such systems. And so we have to ask the question of ourselves, what's PAI's point of view when it comes to navigating carefully this duel in a way that we're really open-minded, but doing the best we can on all sides?
100%. I just can't believe how many papers you have mentioned since we sat down. I'm exhausted thinking about it.
And I won't mention this morning's paper,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
There's a paper that launched this morning on AI and biosecurity. Feel free to look at my LinkedIn post on that. It's a one-year effort that came to the fore today, this morning. Yeah.
Great. One, yeah. No, he's on his way. Hold on. Thanks, Albert.
Hi, Sean Peters, AI for All. Very excited to be able to hear you speak, both of you speak this morning. So at AI for All, we focus on training students for their next internship, college students' next internships in AI. We have a focus on responsible AI, and that kind of comes from one of our co-founders, Dr. Lee. Feels really passionate about human-centered AI. So in training these students, we're always asking ourselves, like, how do we prepare these students for roles that we don't even know will exist? What's going to be their jobs in 5, 10, 15 years? So my question for you is, how should we be thinking differently about the evolution of training tomorrow's AI technologists, and how should that be different from how we've done it in the past?
Here's my reaction to your question. What a great working group to stand up. No, I'm serious. I mean, these are the kinds of questions we want to have framed by this community to help us focus attention on rising issues like self-conception, my plans for my career, what do I study, what's the best educational curricula for the future, what's it going to be like to commit to a role. I mean, I have a paper that I shared early on with Microsoft's senior leadership team was from the Journal of Radiology that said, this is like 5 years ago now, that said medical students finishing up their degree and choosing their residency were starting to avoid radiology because 5 years ago, things have changed since then, it seemed that radiology was sensitive to changing greatly with the advent of AI systems that could read X-ray films easily. And therefore they said, you know, maybe that's not for me, I'm gonna go somewhere else. Well, unfortunately, generative AI is catching up on multiple fronts with human competencies. So it's a really great question you're asking.